Hi, I'm here to talk about TouchWM, which is a little window manager I've been working on. I'm going to be running it here on Fedora 20, which is living within a virtual machine on my Surface Pro 2. The general idea of it is that touchscreen devices have been getting more and more common. We're using them throughout more and more of our day, and we're getting pretty good at their user interfaces, especially for smaller form factor devices like phones and tablets and that kind of thing. As a software developer, though, I've been wondering how that may or may not scale up to larger screens, to larger workstations, and I put it to myself as a little bit of a learning experience whether I could create some sort of an interface that I might actually be interested in using for software development. Now, what that would mean is that it would have to be capable of supporting lots of different windows, lots of different programs, in a way that I haven't seen satisfactorily done on a workstation type basis before either. We're assuming basically everything is full screen, as you'd see in Android or that kind of a user interface, or you're basically falling back on the old Windows style interface based on title bars and buttons which are inconveniently small to manage with a touch. So I've got here an XFCE environment, which is currently all basically default, nothing really worth noting about it, except I am going to be starting Xcomp Manager, which is just a shortcut on my part because the details of managing transparencies and that kind of thing weren't really the focus of my attention at this point in time. So I've got that running, and I'm going to move to my little development directory here, and I'm going to start TouchWM by telling it to replace XFWM4, just so it'll go away and TouchWM takes over. And the first thing we're going to see is it almost looks like everything crashed. My title bar's gone, along with it all of the buttons. I have no obvious indication of how I'm supposed to interact with my windows. That's actually somewhat intentional. It's not that I've got anything in particular against title bars or their buttons, but I felt like if I'm going back to the drawing board on how I might want to interact with my windows, then maybe I shouldn't be taking these sorts of older ideas with me until I've proved their necessity to myself. So, if I'm not interacting with Windows through title bars and clicking and dragging in the old-fashioned way, then how do I interact with my windows? TouchWM works on the concept of multi-touch, which is to say that most of the time, if you're just tapping around on your screen, you probably want to be interacting with exactly that thing you're tapping on. So, for the most common case, single touch, we just assume that that has nothing to do with the window manager and that goes straight to the application. TouchWM ignores single touches in most cases. If you actually want to use TouchWM, you start using more than one touch. So, if I want to move my window here, I can select it by tapping with two fingers, and you'll notice it goes a little bit translucent. That's your visual indicator that this window is currently selected. If I tap it again, it goes opaque and everything's back to normal. So I select again with two fingers, and I can move it around so I can still access my desktop icons and that kind of thing. I can also pull up my application menu, sorry for a few misclicks there, and say I pull up File Manager. I can start moving both windows around. I can raise them by pointing on them. I can still drag and select in a way that's pretty intuitive. And we're happy. If you want to do other actions, you can also take advantage of multi-touch. So, if I want to resize this window, I can actually just select with two fingers and resize it as I need that way. You'll also notice that creates this little beach ball looking radial menu, which replaces a lot of the stuff that would normally go on a title bar. So, it always centers itself around the first touch that it receives. On that basis, I strongly recommend selecting things first with your middle finger so that you have a finger on each side that you can use to select the buttons that you might be interested in. Right now, they're pretty obvious buttons. I've got one for maximize, one for simulating a right click. I'm not exactly sure how I feel about that one, but that's an attempt at the moment. Close, vertical maximize, horizontal maximize, minimize, and pin on top. So if I select maximize, everything works as you might expect. except you get to work with buttons that are a lot larger than you would on your normal title bar interface without taking up all of the screen space that you would normally lose to a title bar. So, if I'm working with an interface that uses multi-touch to identify events that are going to the window manager itself, what if I've got an interest in using an application that itself requires multi-touch? One of the canonical examples of that to most people is probably Google Maps. And, you know, everyone's familiar with the pinch to zoom functionality there. And that causes a bit of a complication if the window manager is going to take that as a signal to resize. And the idea that I'm working with at the moment for that is that 3 touches are a difficult signal to interpret. If I touch my window with 3 touches, sorry, I only recognize 2 there. If I go with 3 touches, what you'll see is everything except my Firefox window goes just a little bit translucent. Again, that's my signal that right now only Firefox has my attention. And if I touch other places, then nothing happens. All touches are reserved strictly for the normal processing that happens. So, fortunately or unfortunately, multi-touch support in web browsers in Linux seems to be a little bit spotty at the moment. It's a little bit difficult to illustrate this as I might have intended, but if I start touching with 2 fingers, you'll see that the window manager itself isn't actually grabbing these events anymore, and Firefox would be free to do whatever it wanted with those. If I touch with 3 fingers, everything goes back to normal. I can start raising windows and moving them around as I please. Now, I acknowledge that 3 touches being useless to normal clients is a big assumption, but I still feel like this is a serviceable functionality for the use cases that I'm aware of so far. I would be thrilled to hear any other ideas that people might have. The other thing that would be of particular interest would be visual indicators, because I am aware that the translucency effect that I'm applying here isn't exactly as intuitive as I might like. So, I think at this point I've shown off the most basic ideas behind TouchWM at this point. I acknowledge that probably not a lot of developers have touchscreen devices attached to Linux machines at the moment, and even fewer of them are going to be inclined to set up an environment where they can actually build and run this. So I'm hoping a few of you might have some feedback based on the video alone. If you do want to build it, I'm sorry to say that it will be a little bit complicated in that you will probably have to build 2 dependent libraries yourself, so that XCB has support for multi-touch input, and also for its little component that tries to simulate right clicks. I apologize, but that's just the way it is at this current moment. Maybe I can do something about that later. But in the meantime, I'd appreciate whatever feedback anybody might have. So I appreciate your time. Thank you for taking a look at it, and I'd be happy to hear from you.